The tick rate is a very important and complex topic in Counter-Strike, so before I get deeper into the actual topic of this video, I will explain the basics and the 4 different tick rates I will be mentioning later. First of all, the tick rate tells you how many times the game state synchronizes between the server and the players every second. In CSGO, official Valve servers were using 64 tick, which synchronizes the game state 64 times a second. But since some players, especially the pros, consider 64 tick too low, most third-party matchmaking services and tournament organizers such as FACEIT were using 128 tick, which synchronizes the game state twice as often. Then we have the tickless subtick system in CS2, which isn't actually tickless. It's just 64 tick with timings connected to user inputs so that the server has a better idea of what's happening between ticks. So for the purpose of this video, I will be calling that the 64 tick subtick. In the early beta of CS2, FACEIT managed to change the tick rate to 128 tick for a short time period, so I will be calling that the 128 tick subtick. So now that we got this sorted out, let's continue with the video. In CSGO, the community always wanted Valve to switch from 64 tick servers to 128 tick ones. Even though most players couldn't tell the difference between the tick rates in nearly all of the aspects of the game, there was one aspect where the tick rate was crucial: the jump throw. Jump throwing is a fundamental mechanic of Counter-Strike as it results in a very specific trajectory of throwing grenades. But for some reason, this trajectory was different depending on the tick rate. So since tournaments were played on 128 tick, all the pros were forced to learn pretty much exclusively 128 tick lineups. And because of that, they were even more discouraged to play on official servers, because they didn't know any jump throw lineups there. This created a massive gap between the FACEIT community and the players who played on official servers. So if you wanted to have a chance of becoming a pro, you were basically forced into giving up on official servers and playing FACEIT. From what we know, there are two main reasons why Valve never switched to 128 tick. The reason number one is simple: higher tick rate requires better servers and those cost more money. But FACEIT had been providing free 128 tick servers for ages, so I don't see that as a valid reason from a company that makes over $1 billion a year just from cases. The second reason is that playing on a 128 tick server demands a better performance from a computer, which would allegedly make CSGO unplayable for the low-end PC users. But I don't think that was a huge problem in CSGO, because the game was just so easy to run on pretty much every device. I myself have a lower end computer and I was running CSGO on more than 400 FPS and I was playing on FACEIT as well. But CS2 requires a pretty good computer to run, so now this seems like a pretty valid argument. Of course, we now have the subtick system, but we already know that it's just a 64 tick with improved timings, which overall is better than normal 64 tick. But if Valve can improve 64 tick with the elements of subtick timings, wouldn't the best thing to do for the smoothest gaming experience be running the subtick system on a 128 tick server? Well, that's exactly what FACEIT did in the early beta of CS2, and the pros claimed that the 128 tick subtick was, in fact, better than the 64 tick subtick. But having a different tick rate in matchmaking and on FACEIT once again introduced problems with switching between the two. Valve claimed that with subtick there would no longer be different jump throw lineups across different platforms, but with FACEIT introducing 128 tick subtick, the lineups were different once again. So instead of working on a way to somehow fix this issue, Valve decided to just hardcode the tick rate so that 64 tick subtick would be the only option anyone could run. But what would happen if Valve finally switched all of their servers to 128 tick subtick? Even with CS2 being more hardware demanding, buying better servers would surely not be a problem for Valve. They make a fucking $1 billion a year just from cases. And even FACEIT were able to run 128 tick CS2 servers before it was patched. But what about the other reason? The user performance. Since there isn't any way to play CS2 on 128 tick, there isn't really any way to accurately tell the difference between the tick rates. So I decided to try to compare CSGO's performance on the two tick rates and applied it to CS2. Normally when comparing performance between two settings, you would just watch the same demo on both of the settings. But that's not possible when comparing tick rate, since demos are recorded in a tick rate of 32 and you cannot change that. So I could have tried to make a test that would be as precise as possible and would rule out any randomness. But since I'm too lazy to do that, I just played 3 games on both tick rates, and since the results were consistent enough, I decided it was good enough and called it a day. Just for clarity, I'm using the GTX 1660 Super paired with an Intel i7-10700K CPU and 32GB of RAM. So first I played 3 matches against bots on a local 64 tick server. And just like every one of you, I only played Mirage and only rushed ramp on CD side and only rushed mid on T side. And luckily for me, the bots did almost the same setup every round, making my benchmark more accurate. I wouldn't call those guys experts. After 3 matches, I switched to 128 tick and did the exact same thing. In the 3 64-tick matches, I averaged 371.3 FPS, 368.9 FPS, and 368.8 FPS, which gives a total average of 369.7 FPS. And in the 3 128-tick matches, I averaged 299.5 FPS, 296.4 FPS, and 303.3 FPS, which gives a total average of 299.7 FPS. So on average, you get about 19% less FPS on 128-tick than on 64-tick in CSGO. I have no idea if we would see a similar difference in CS2, but I haven't found any better way to estimate it. And since most CS2 players are not reaching absolutely high FPS like in CSGO, and we even already has 2 crashes in very important rounds of S-tier tournaments, there is no doubt going for 128-tick would not be a very good idea at this time. But maybe in a few years, when RTX 4070s will be the new low-tier GPUs, we could talk about implementing 128-tick subtick again. All of that also answers why we never got official 128-tick servers in Global Offensive. Maybe Valve really didn't want to spend money on servers, or they really believed that it would make some players unable to play the game. But maybe it's because they knew about CS2 a long time ago and knew that if they implemented 128-tick, they would have to downgrade to 64-tick subtick with CS2's release, which could have angered the community and worsened the hate CS2 was getting at release. But overall, I don't think that the tick rate is a huge problem in CS2, especially given that most of my premier matches are ruined by cheaters anyway. Like this guy, who can't even bunny hop properly and gets headshot no-scoped by another cheater. Yeah, this is the current state of the game we love. Just before I end this video, I have a little fun fact for you. Did you know that 64-tick is actually pretty good compared to what many other games use? It will probably not surprise you that games like Dota 2 or League of Legends use a lower tick rate of 30. But what if I told you that Fortnite uses 30 tick as well? Do you think that's bad? Apex Legends and Warzone 2 went even lower. Both of the games use 20 tick. And these games don't use subtick timings or anything else to make up for the low tick rate, so it's way more common for things like dying behind a corner to happen. And what about CS2's biggest rival? Well, it hurts me to say this, but Valorant has 128 tick. And on that terrible news, it's time to end. I don't plan on making another video anytime soon, but in case I ever upload again, please consider subscribing. Also, let me know about your opinion in the comments and thank you for watching.